Definitely, definitely. So what are you filming in Serbia, Rachel?
So we're filming Miss Scarlet and the Duke, season 5. Today we were in the middle of kind of nowhere, which is why I was slightly worried about our Wi-Fi about speaking to you. But I managed to get back to the studio, so we're leaving the location, and the rest of the crew are coming back to the studio to do some scenes on set. So that's what
That's
we're doing.
fantastic. So tell me about a lot of the research involved, because from watching it as a casual viewer, and I may be a little more than a casual viewer because all my life I've been interested in Victorian mysteries and Jack the Ripper and Conan Doyle, Jack Futrell, all those great detectives that with stories that were written at that period, and this feels very, very, very accurate. And in fact, the last time, I don't know if you remember this. I think I'm older than you, so I think I remember that a little better. It was the Sergeant Crib mysteries of Peter Lovesey.
No, I don't remember that.
Those are great. They had a I remember they had this whole episode when I was a kid that I saw, and it was about this race. It was kind of, I think, like a 24-hour walking race. When I spoke to
Right.
Peter Lovesey about that, I said, "So, did this really happen?" He said, "Yeah, this happened." And he had all sorts of these little known facts about things that occurred during the Victorian era that I was not familiar with. And when I've watched the series, I've just have felt that same thing, that it was just very, very well and meticulously researched.
Yeah, I mean, I write with my writing partner Ben Edwards. We're both really into history, and I particularly enjoy this period. And it's just a case of just doing the reading. Obviously, the internet is completely invaluable now. I don't know how anybody writes without it now, because I'm constantly diving into it. Um, and there's so many interesting stories from that period. But I've sort of said this before, but it's what we really try and do is we've try and find an interesting story of the week, but emotionally try and weave through something that we will recognize today, if that makes sense. So that's as important to me, so people can at least invest in Eliza and understand what. There's other times when, not very often, but there are other times where you go, well, actually that wouldn't happen then, but you sort of let it go because it works creatively. There's a gap between people's expectations of what that period was like and the reality of it. So a few times people have suggested various things, and I've just gone no, because that just seems so crazy, and it was right, it was accurate, but you just, as a viewer, you'd go, that's nuts. So it's that balance between what you feel, what the expectation of the audience is, what feels realistic in that period, and trying to connect it up to now as well.
Well, the interesting thing you're speaking about up to now, and when you look at this series and you see how women were marginalized and were living in a very male-dominated chauvinistic society, when you go back and when you're writing the series, do you think the more of the wow, things were really, really, horrible then, but also at the other hand, there's a lot of progress that has to be made now.
Yeah, I think that you look back and I certainly wouldn't want to be, unless really the only, you would want to have a bit of money if you're going to live, especially as a woman in that time. I think it was brutally hard for most people, but particularly women, because they were working really long hours. They had lots of children. They then had to come home and do all their domestic chores, and they didn't have, fridges or washing machines or any electric irons. I mean, I think it would have been pretty hellish. Um, we still have a fair way to go now, but I feel like things have changed quite dramatically for women since that period. But yes, not probably as much as they should do, but we're getting there.
The interesting thing is, I think that this is maybe you'll concur with me that your writing job and creative job is very, very difficult because rather than the hope, and I love Sherlock Holmes, but rather than Sherlock Holmes, who's running onto this scene and who everybody will have to take very seriously, you're dealing with somebody who has many in that world that she was living in, many disadvantages, but has to use guile and cleverness and all sorts of methods to get to the bottom of a lot of these cases and to get these doors open to influence the process, the story process.
Yeah, and that was really the point, because I wanted to, at the center of this story, I wanted somebody who was interesting and flawed, but also hugely determined to try and have what a man would have. I mean, that makes the best drama and often the best comedy is when you're the underdog. So she has to really use her smarts to be able to, move around society seamlessly. She often gets into trouble, or she often has many doors slammed in her face, but she just carries on going. And what we often try to do with Eliza is, it might not be the thing she wants more than anything. She might not quite get that, but she gets a small triumph somehow, in some other way, because life isn't fair. But it's kind of telling those stories to be entertaining and to have those crime stories that wind and weave through the episode, but also to see what obstacles are thrown in her way and how she tries to prevail.
Were there any Victorian woman who she was modeled upon, who there is some little degree of influence, like the people I would think of not as a detective, but the people who managed to forge their path during a very, very difficult time would be, let's say, Florence Nightingale or Elizabeth Fry, but who would you, say that there was some degree of some historical precedent of somebody forging ahead in a very difficult Victorian world?
I was always really interested in the Pankhurst family, and in fact, it was sort of quite recently that my grandmother was born in 1898 in
Wow.
yeah, so she was old, and she died a long time ago. But I realized that she was adopted by her aunt and uncle because her parents both died, and her uncle was the warden of Wormwood Scrubs, and it would have been during the period that a lot of the suffragettes were brought there. And had I known that when I was a teenager, I would have sat and had conversations with her, because she was essentially living there, and she would have, her life was very domestic, and in fact she spent most of her life as a domestic servant. But that really sparked something in me, that the almost like imaginary conversations I would have had with my grandmother had I had any interest in history at that point. I was too busy sort of going out and earning my Saturday job money so I could go out with my friends. But I am really interested in that. So that is, later, but there were lots of women who came before them. And it's a mixture of those women that are pushing the boundaries, but also the women that I love in fiction, which would be Elizabeth Bennet. I absolutely adored her. I do quite like Austen's Emma as well. She's hugely flawed, but she's funny. So it's a mixture of, because you can have, for the best will in the world, you can have something accurate historically, but the character has to be entertaining, or it has to be somebody that you can engage with, and on some level, to some extent, what they're going through resonates with you. So it's a bit of a mismatch, really. I certainly knew that I didn't want to write something like, for me, Sherlock Holmes is a superhero, and although the stories are amazing, he always figures everything out, as does Eliza, but he doesn't have that many obstacles. He just seems to know everything, and she has to
Yeah.
struggle a bit more, which I think is much more, it's funnier, and there's more drama to be had with that.
Well, you're an admirer of Dickens, so tell me how how Dickens influenced you, because I love Dickens, and I'll make a confession that my favorite Charles Dickens book, and you're gonna think I'm a dark person, is Hard Times.
That is a really dark way. I think Dickens started, for me, in all honesty, when I was a kid, and it was the big the musical Oliver, the original what was his name?
Was it
Who
Albert Finney was in it, or am I
Yes,
mistaken?
yes. No, it was probably 1960s. I'm just trying to think. It was the Lionel Bart's Oliver,
Okay.
the big Hollywood. And I was so engaged in that story of, the workhouse, and it was just the most amazing story, and the adventure he goes on, and then he finds his grandfather, but he doesn't know it's his grandfather. So that really engaged me. And then when I was at school, I started to do um, uh, more English literature, went on to college and did my English A level. So that we did more kind of Dickens then. And I love the Dickens story in itself about where he's from. There's a wonderful Christmas film. I don't know whether you've seen it on Netflix, called The Man Who Invented Christmas. And it's
No.
about Dickens. It's a kind of comedy drama. It's got Dan Stevens starring in it. And it's beautiful. And it's about Dickens, about how he's haunted by his past, and how he's got this creative block, and he's trying to write A Christmas Carol. It's really worth checking out. But anyway, I digress. I was really interested in his own story as well, as I was with Jane Austen. Like, it's sometimes the writers have these incredible lives, and so that's what engages me particularly about those two writers.
And they were ahead of their time in many, many respects. Like there's some good writers and unknown writers. Like I like Hugh Walpole and A.E. Copard and even John Galsworthy, and they were great in their time. But when you look at Charles Dickens and Jane Austen, you see people who are really, really way ahead of their time, and there's a reason why people are still picking up their books and reading them.
Exactly. And there is so much humanity in them as well. Like with Austen, I always thought was amazing was her worlds are so domestic, yet they kind of, because they don't really, she never really goes into the politics of the time too much. Occasionally she'll hint at it, but even within those domestic worlds, she's still dealing with those big universal themes, and it's about female repression, and that you didn't really have any choice but to marry, for a comfortable life, and for a comfortable life for your family, you had to marry money. And but I did read somewhere, which made me laugh, that the heroines always do get the massive house, which I think is probably her being, doing it in a wry way. But yeah, they were incredibly progressive, and also so clever in the fact that they wrote these wonderful stories, but they were they were for the masses. They weren't, for writers at the time. And Shakespeare was like that as well. Like Shakespeare, like Dickens, had a troubled childhood. His father was had debts, and lost his job. I think he was the mayor, and he was sort of brought really low, and there was a lot of snobbery about Shakespeare when he arrived on the scene. Everyone else was highly educated, but he wasn't. So there's definitely a theme there that I enjoy and find fascinating, and I love his works as well. So, and
Definitely.
again, he was able to write something for the masses, which I think is amazing, especially for the time.
I know the problem I have with the literary world today is that if you go to the fiction section, you feel that the fictional books, some of the main books that are thrust into us as, oh, this is a must read, this is a book club read, and they don't feel like books that you can identify with as some of the books that were published, let's say 150, 60 years ago.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's strange, isn't it? I mean, sometimes, I don't have much time. When I'm filming, I find it really difficult to get into any books. It's almost like I can't invest the energy into it. So I'm looking forward to when I finish here, digging down into some, like a nice juicy novel. I've been trying to read some Serbian novels, not in Serbian, because it's a really difficult language, but they're kind of interesting. They're very they're generally tragedies. There's never very sort of many happy endings, but yeah, I need to. I'm a bit of a holiday reader. When I'm working, I find it difficult, and I find it difficult as well to get into dramas, in the evenings watching TV. When I'm in this world and this story, I just want mindless nonsense, so I don't have to concentrate on anything. So yeah, that's my secret admission.
I have no problem at all. I'm like you. I when I go on a vacation, I read a lot, and then when I'm not on vacation, I just like watch something funny for half an hour because I want my mind to be racing with something serious.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So tell me,
absolutely.
what is why do you think period dramas are so popular?
Um, I for me, it's just escapism. I can escape into those worlds so much easier than something contemporary. Really good example was The Crown. The first two seasons I thought were some of those episodes were some of the best writing, directing, acting. It just didn't get any better than that. Particularly the relationship between Elizabeth and Churchill, and then as the seasons went on, the nearer they got to present day, that I just lost. I mean, they were still beautifully done and the quality is still amazing, but I was less engaged with it. And I think there's something in escaping into a world that you kind of can recognize, but is different to your own. I think that's why people love. When I was growing up, I used to watch a lot of spaghetti westerns with my dad, and I loved them. Um, I loved all the old Hollywood, Spartacus and the Vikings and those uh, big Hollywood films, which were all obviously periods. So yeah, I think it's to do with escapism, really.
And then the casting, how did you come upon the two the major leads in the film? Were there many people you had to choose from? How did that work out?
So Kate Phillips was always on our radar because she'd been in The Crown. My other really favourite show, possibly of all time, is Wolf Hall. I don't know whether you've seen that in the States yet.
I'm
It's
sorry,
another
what was it called?
Wolf Hall.
I have
It's a
not seen it
masterful
yet.
show. Yeah, it's about Henry VIII's relationship with Thomas Cromwell, his kind of main advisor, and Kate played Jane Seymour in that, and she's just finishing filming the last book. It's a trilogy, but I'd seen her in various things. Obviously, she was in Peaky Blinders as well. Myself and the producers really were keen on her. She's got something, I think, extraordinary, and now I've worked with her for 5 years, and she doesn't stop. I don't know, surprising me, or watching her is just, it's incredible. She's a really incredible actor. So we secured her pretty quickly. And then with Stuart, it was a case of, okay, who could partner her up? And I saw met various actors for Duke, and then just Stuart just strolled into the Charlotte Street Hotel. Kate was with me, and it was like, yeah, it's him. I mean, just putting them together, this petite blonde woman I could see running rings around this big, big sort of warm Scot. And it was actually Stuart that rang me and said, because Duke was meant to be from London originally, and he said, what do you think about if I kept if I just did the Scottish, and I said, that's fine, but make sure you're nice and clear for the American audience. So he did bring it down a little bit. One of our execs, Patty Ishimoto, she's like my partner in crime here, and she's always here with me in Belgrade, and she's always listening out for accents, and she'll go, tell them to slow down a bit, or so yeah, we were so lucky with Kate and Stuart. And obviously now the news is out that Stuart's not coming back. So what I can tell you is we do have a new leading man who is extremely lovely, and it's working out very well.
That's fantastic. So you have some very interesting parts of the Victorian underworld. And how did you come about that? Because I used to love reading, this parts of the Baker Street Irregulars. So when I've watched the series, I've said, oh, I love this. It's a homage to the Victorian underworld.
Yeah. Well, as I say, a lot of it is, I mean, I'm myself and my writing partner, Ben, we're both into podcasts. I listen to a lot of history podcasts. So it's just a case of articles, newspaper articles. People seem to send me, on my Instagram. I'm not on it very often, but when I do go on it, I have all these private messages for people I've never met going, oh, have you thought about this story and that story? And I'm just sort of constantly aware of looking at the newspaper or looking, listening to a podcast or documentaries. I'm a huge documentary fan, so it's just, and then sometimes you think, oh, this is going to be amazing, and you literally storyline it and it doesn't work. So the other thing about Scarlet, that I think the difference with Scarlet as opposed to lots of other shows which are story of the week, we have a lot of serial. So we were never really interested in, the crime stories are clearly crucial, but it's always about the characters. That's the main. It's like, how does it affect them? How does it affect her? What problems does this particular story of the week create for her? What's it telling her about her own life? So we've always got that sort of feminist theme running through it.
And how do you keep it punchy after? I know this is not like something that's been going on for 10 years, but
Yeah.
still, you're working on your fifth season, is that correct?
Yes.
After
Yes.
5 seasons, how do you keep it fresh? How do you manage to keep it punchy? How do you manage to just always come up with new plots, always come up with these new things? Is it a case of the characters in a way taking on a life of their own?
I think there's lots of factors. That's definitely one of them. These wonderful actors like Kathy Belton and Kate Phillips, and we've got lots of new characters as well, like Simon Ludders, who plays Mr. Potts. They just breathe life into these characters, and so they do definitely have a life of their own. I think also Ben and I are our background is in comedy writing. So we wrote on comedy shows for a very long time. So that's really helped keep that sort of punchiness, and because it's not, I wouldn't say it's a comedy drama, but there's definitely comedy in it. And when we're creating a new character, they're generally quite funny. Like in season 4, her new business partner, he's Nash's dodgy accountant, Clarence. He's really funny. He's a brilliant actor, Paul Basil, and it was about what character will cause Eliza the most problems. So we always tend to sort of lean towards the funny, but then we obviously want those moments of real drama and pathos. And but I think it does help that we have written a lot of comedy.
Well, what are the greatest challenges when you're on set? I can imagine everything is probably very planned out and all the storylines, but when the shooting begins, what are some of the things that you look at and you say to yourself, this is a challenge. How do I get through this?
By surrounding yourself with a really incredibly talented team. So my job is every single thing you see, once Ben and I have written the episodes, everything you see on screen. So it's like the set decoration, the costumes, locations, the casting, everything is my responsibility to make sure it's right. And within those divisions, you've got all these amazing departments run by very clever department heads. We have a fantastic line producer. The director I'm working with, Ivan Zhikovic, he did some Scarlet episodes in 2 and 3. He's come back to do most of the episodes for season 5. He's an amazing director. I've got a brilliant DOP, Milos Kodema. So that's been key, to have those key positions with people that you really trust, because it can be a really overwhelming job. But when you have that team where you can rely on them and you can delegate and communicate with them, and we've now got such a shorthand because this is our 4th season in Belgrade. Our first season was in Ireland, and then we moved to Belgrade after COVID. So that's really helpful. So I do rely on the team and the different department heads a lot. And we have a lot of meetings.
But it doesn't
um,
get easier, does it?
it doesn't get easier. I think it's because also I always want it to get bigger and better. So I always
Yeah.
want, more locations and let's get outside more. And because you want to keep beating the last season, you want it to get better. But luckily they're as ambitious for the show as I am. So it's a real team. It's a real team. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it is a real Scarlet family out here because they're so invested in it. I think often I know in Belgrade, but maybe in some of the other Eastern European countries, you rarely get to be the head of your department. You usually get like an American or a Brit coming in, but they're all Serbian. Right now there's just me, apart from the actors, there's just myself and Patty Ishimoto who deals with all the financial side of things. She's American, I'm a Brit, but everyone else is Serbian. And I think that's allowed them to really personally invest in this show.
Wow, that's a tough position, and that you do a great job. So finally, how long will you be filming, and what will you be doing after this is over, besides probably sleeping for 3 straight days?
So we wrap at the end of April, and then I go home back to the UK, and I'm straight into the edit. And that will take me probably, well, full time, that will take me to the end of sort of mid-July, because that's everything from the edit to the music, the composing. So I work with these great composers called Phase Music. I've got a wonderful editor. And I do that from my house in just outside London, and we do that in Ireland. So it's remote, and the final mixes and the grading and everything. And once that's done, then I'll sleep.
So do you have
For
any
a very
other
long
projects
time.
slated? I'm sorry, what was
Yeah,
that?
for a very long time.
Do you have any other projects slated after that, or?
I've got a couple of things. I find it difficult to. There's lots of things I'd love to do. I mean, they are all period. But when I'm in Scarlet, I'm in Scarlet. I find it incredibly difficult to. So I generally don't take meetings or anything like that when I'm in Scarlet. But once that's done, and I come up for air, then I'll be open to other
You're
things.
out of the Scarlet zone.
Out of the Scarlet Zone, yeah, exactly. It's difficult to when you're in the Scarlet Zone, it's difficult to sort of think about anything else. So
Well, you've done a fantastic job, and it was so nice talking to
thank
you.
you, Andrew. You too. I'm sorry about the late email, but we got there in the end.
No problem at all. Have a good shooting, and a good shoot and a wonderful production. I'm sure it'll be a hit in the United States like the past few have been.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Take
No problem.
care.
Take care. Bye.